There was once a world with two species of creatures. One lived life as they must, with no thought given thereto, while the other also lived life as they had to, but with the addition of thinking about it. My plan right here was to offer a conclusive punchline to the story, but why bother? From an unadorned view, the only way to apparently get somewhere amidst mortal existence is by first adopting a mortally conceived of model of existence, wherein you can apparently get somewhere. Man's dreamed of ascension from being flawed to being perfected can only be imagined after he has a mind capable of imagining such concepts as flawed and perfected. I've already noted for you that it's actually quite simple. You live, then you die. Anything in addition to that is just you thinking about it. And the plum for the few being the fact that there is a more satisfying level of mental activity beyond thinking. In one land was a race of creatures all born as Siamese twins, and while they instinctively worked together, they believed otherwise. One man particularly disliked the dreams of his nighttime sleeping state because, said he, they stood as intensified reflections of his normal, though disturbing, daytime mental condition. Then there was this other guy who bypassed all such comparisons and directly despised his. As he strolled along one of life's byways, a guy began improvising a song. I'm as typical a man as you can find, and I only do what's on my mind. But then stopped and thought, yeah, except when I don't, which for all of my normal awareness may be most of the time. And the musical question continues to be, is it mental or is it instinctive? In one universe, the beings were born with all of their openings already closed up. Well, but look on the bright side. They didn't have anything to worry about. They didn't have anything they could worry about. Man's mind says, there are two kinds of people in the world, me and everybody else. While his instinct says, what's everybody else? Second version, man's mind says there are two kinds of people in the world, me and everybody else. While enriched awareness would say there is one kind of creature, and we're all it. A man once noted, it's a shame that instinct can't speak. But it can, but it's far too blunt and futuristic to be normally heard. In fact, in part, this has always been mysticism's responsibility, to attempt a palatable running translation thereof. From a strictly mental view, the challenge is how to do something fresh with thinking that is not ultimately just more thinking about it. The truth is, you can theorize and philosophize about man's condition until hippos develop stress disorders, and it won't do you a bit of good. But looked at positively, that's good to know. For the few, the hurling of slop wouldn't be so bad were it not for the fact that it will eventually get on you. I told you already that criticism is never a nutrient. One man stopped and thought, what is the transcendental sense in man's mind studying his instinct? It should be studying itself. Okay, so some man didn't think that, so I made it up. So sue me. Part of the purpose of the thinking life automatically provides in man is to act as a finger, to point in directions non-threatening to the routine sequential order. If you operate just by your ordinary mind, what you have is a mind that has a mind of its own, and you end up with nothing. WBT. Weird but true. And lastly, just time for another ITAPDLS TBIH-TBT. Trying to study thought without thinking, trying to study thought through thinking is like trying to shout down an echo. ITAPDLS TBIA-TBT. Isn't that a perfectly darling little simile? Too bad it has to be true. Still regarding our present little as he began to look more and more hitting man through the level of cortical consciousness and dividing him right now, he and his existence, into do I have to add? It's supposed to be inherent in the sentence. But how men actually live life. And this other part, amongst other descriptions and other uses of it, is how men think otherwise. And part of it that I wanted to hit tonight had to do with criticism again. There's a danger, the reason I keep picking on criticism, and as a matter of fact, the reality behind why all public forms of mysticism, why all religions, why most decent people's humane ideas in some way carry dispersuasions, if not prohibitions against criticism, all the way from it's not up to man to criticize, leave it in the hands of the gods, and all that stuff, to it's simply being pointed out at a more secular level that it's not very civilized, it's not very social and decent to criticize other people. There is a danger with a few people of a very specific nature of criticism. And it's simply this, that if you criticize the external world, other people, it's about all you have to criticize. If you do that, it will eventually turn into you criticizing yourself at the mental level. Criticizing yourself mentally. Criticizing yourself physically is neither here nor there. But criticizing yourself mentally is the end of everything. Pretty crude, but I'll clean that up. What it amounts to is a kind of internal dialogue enhancer, as if you, by God, needed one. It will activate, even to a greater degree, the appeal of the internal tar baby. The kind of traffic running through a man's mind, the sorts of automatic, intrinsic operations of the mind that will forever keep a man from any other state of consciousness. Surely by now that's becoming glaringly obvious, at least sometimes, that whatever you do with the kind of traffic running through your mind, that life has already provided, no matter who you are and no matter what you think. If it's already there, there's no way that you're going to reroute it. There's no way that you're going to separate some of the coaches and the cars of that train, reconfigure them, break them up, clean them up, wash them, grease the wheels, repaint the cars. There's no way, there's nothing that you can do within that context of changing what you think, what life has given you to think, that would in any way alter your level of consciousness. If there was any possibility of ordinary people collectively ever seeing what this sort of activity is about, then what I just said would have been obvious by the time Adam's first kid arrived. By the time men were already playing with the mind and beginning to find in certain respects that the ordinary thinking that life provides is not unlike unknowing relatives who seem to claim, who apparently have just come for a visit, but who, by God, won't ever leave. That is, that if you criticize, which everyone has criticism about the kinds of things that their mind does, and it doesn't have to be of a world-shaking order, but just the thing that you can't get a song out of your mind. You keep saying over the same line over and over. Or you keep repeating some insult that someone directed toward you 5 minutes ago or 5 years ago. So if a person gives much attention, even a non-mystical sort, if he gives any attention to his internal condition, and you ask him later if a man said he had been attempting to study himself, he'd have been attempting to reflect upon the nature of man. And if you say, well, what have you gotten from it thus far? Most likely he would say something with a little encouragement and finally get to the point of him saying, well, most of what goes on in our minds is just garbage. I mean, it's repetitive. It doesn't get anywhere. It distracts one oftentimes from the job at hand that you will, and I'm giving them credit, but an ordinary mind can come up with things similar to this. They say, well, at times they can distract from the job at hand, that you're worried about what people will think or what the ultimate outcome will be. All in all, about the best you could give an ordinary person if they applied themselves to this attempted study of themselves, not their behavior, but the study of man's condition, which refers to his internal state, or should. They would conclude, at best, that much of it needs to be changed, altered, deleted, reduced. And man has had easily, that you know of, 7,000 or 8,000 years to do that with a striking amount, with a striking absence of success. And yet no one learns anything from it, as always, collectively. There is nothing to do with the thinking that life has already provided to man that will change the level of consciousness. The thing about criticism is, as if you needed the wheels of the train greased, as if you needed to be standing out on the tracks, telling life, trying to direct, send over some more of that stuff over here, as if you needed that. Criticism will eventually seem to enhance it. And what I was going to point out is always there is some reality behind even mundane workaday historical snippets and epithets having to do with morality. In this case being criticism. It's not the fact, if you realize what the basis of it is, it's not the fact that it's immoral to criticize or it's un-Christian-like or un-Muslim-like. It's none of that. But here's the thing. If you could start off, let's divide up, jump in the midst of human existence as you must if you're going to speak about it, and just start that you're in a non-critical state. And there you stand, and suddenly somebody says something. You hear an idea, you read something, and you start to yourself to think, well, those ignorant sons of bitches, or you stupid bastard, whatever it is. If you do that, here's the danger for a few. You cannot do that and start criticizing the life of man. Or you can't criticize anything, but you start off apparently criticizing externally. But there is no way to stop it after that. None. Good intentions do not count. Nothing counts. Because once you do that, it is a short step. You will eventually, and it could be a matter of seconds. And of course, all this goes on continually in you, but I'm giving you a kind of historical, made-up view of how it could have started. That after you once turn it externally to anything, it will turn on you. You will turn it on you. You have no more control over it than you did criticizing whatever it was to start with that apparently was an external matter. You will turn it on you. Now, this has nothing to do with whether you deserve criticism. Anybody that thinks they deserve criticism, by the way, is a living example of, I'll do it for the third time in this lifetime, that the simple view is, you live, then you die. Anything in addition to that is you thinking about it. From that simple, unadorned view, which is not commonly available, and it sounds like some sort of cynical or sophomoric smart-ass remark, but it's not. You live, you die. Anything in addition to that is simply you thinking about it. For the first part of that comment, you live, dash, then you die. Semicolon. Up to that point, within that context, there is simply nothing to criticize in man's behavior, in his existence. This has nothing to do with collective man. Man would not continue to operate as a vehicle for the expansion of life if that were true. And any reasonable, sane person, any civilized human being would laugh in my face at that comment if they thought I was serious, to say there is nothing to criticize about man. It's not one of the things that can be argued, and people have said such as that before. But you've got to remember, people have said something, people have said everything. That didn't mean that they understand it. There's nothing to criticize in the life of man if you see what the life of man is. Would you like a hint? This is not proof. It would take an exceptional mind to even get the juice from the hint. Here's the hint. No one, knowing they're dying, laying on their deathbed, and still have their mental facilities more or less intact, no man, no woman has ever been laying there on their knowingly on their deathbed and found any fault with life. Well, obviously some of you almost heard it before I finished the sentence, and in a non-meaningful way, that's a known fact. Maybe not everybody on the planet, but it is commonly known that you can point out, if anybody's ever been around a deathbed, that you had some old uncle or maiden aunt or somebody who was just a living rat's ass, just drove everybody crazy. All they got to do is come down with a fatal disease and stay alive long enough for people to get around the bedside, and they will turn into a saint. And I don't mean it's some sort of sham attempt at the last minute to placate the gods and make up. It's not that. It is when the kind of energy, and the whole thing of the man's nervous system, as I pointed out before, and you're being run, the energy, the electrochemical energy flows from planet Earth through men. And once you, same way as sick, but once you start dying, it's still part of the laws of physics, if you want to look at it that way. The energy run up the human nervous system and culminating at the apex in life on this planet in the human brain, the mind, energy starts depleting from the top down, which is why when you get sick, whether you ever notice it or not, just a cold or anything that's finally going to, in a sense, temporarily incapacitate you, your mind, I always hate to say this, for a reason I'll tell you, your mental capacities begin to be depleted before anything else. And in years past, I pointed out to people, and I've had people go, wait a minute. And they go, nah, I know what you're saying, that finally when you get sick and you kind of get groggy and all that, but nah, I'll start coughing, I'll start getting tired before it happens to my mind. That's why I hate to do it, because as soon as they told me that, the first person I went, well, I could have put it another way, because I saw that they believe that, but all it does is reflect on how much they understand or how much they notice about their mind. Do you understand why I say I hate to say it? It's similar to that it doesn't hurt to be stupid if you're finally so stupid that you don't notice it. For me to point out that the first thing, energy gets depleted from the top down. When you start getting sick, and death being the ultimate sickness, it drains up here. At any rate, if people don't, anyone who says, well, I never noticed that, I always thought I got sick, I know what you're saying, it will eventually take its toll on you mentally. You can't concentrate, and you just kind of lose your powers of attention. But that's after you're really sick and the physical symptoms come out. Okay, if you say so. At any rate, it will drain the energy, not just out of the body if someone's dying, and it's not a sham show of repentance on their part for having lived a life of being a walking critic. It is simply a fact. I don't guess I'd say more because I could hear some of the reaction that you knew what I was saying or going to say, that the person literally, and it may have happened to some of you that you thought that you were deathly ill, that you were really frightened waiting for x-rays to come back, that you may have that the doctor already warned you could have a potentially fatal malady of some kind, some cancer or something. And for the several days or several hours where it took for them to come back with the reports, just think back. Most people try to ignore that, or they do ignore such as that. But you turn into almost, it's an old story, sometimes they'll drag it out in poetry and literature and the movies, that you know you're dying, and they show the person, suddenly their face lights up, and they pull things like, well, at least it's going to make me stop and smell the flowers and appreciate life, wherein before I was always so busy trying to get ahead and etc. You don't have to go to those kinds of rococo adorned extremes. It is simply that the energy is being drained out of you, and it started up here. Well, it eventually gets there, whichever way you want to look at it. And up here is the only place man has critical faculties. And so it comes out, and it's not some sort of sham, and it's not some kind of grace of God that they allow you a few hours or a few days of living in a better state since you know you're dying. It's not that. It's once you start draining the energy out of the human nervous system and it gets up to here, that's one of the things that goes is criticism. So now think about it. If that goes faster than your ability to even stand up or to go out and play touch football once you find you're dying, or if that goes, as always, you should go ahead and ask yourself the rhetorical question of what real significance, of what actual validity was it? Was it genuine? There is nothing. This just flies in the face of all morality, I know. And we certainly would not, if we could, overnight or immediately make everyone in this world believe or operate as though other people, that nothing in the life of man was worthy of criticism, because we would all be immediate living heirs of Attila. Things would fall apart. But once you see what life is, once you see what it is, there is simply no criticism left. And you can't explain it. There's nothing to say after that. And if you can probably guess yourself, if you ever tried to say that to an ordinary person, they would take you to be an absolute idiot or worse. Because they want to debate, they would then start, well, how do you explain the fact of people, tyrants right now, killing innocent women and children, some king somewhere, some ruler, stealing all the money, and people are starving. They can pick out all the atrocities of history and say, how do you explain that? You're going to tell me you're not going to criticize Papa Joe or Mussolini or Attila? You're not going to do that? You can't. There's nowhere to go with it. Because you certainly can't say, well, no, I won't criticize them. So it's not the kind of thing that is ever going to be in popular usage, because it cannot be commonly seen. But back to the fact, you either get to where you can begin to see it or you don't. There is nothing in the life of man to be criticized. It is, in effect, I could be crude and call it a form of hubris. It's just really a form of low awareness, but I can draw the comparison, as I think I've done before. All right, I know I have. I always sound kind of literary and intellectual. I think perhaps I have, or I suggest I have. Sane men cannot find criticism with any other creature on this planet. No one ever goes out in their backyard and looks at all the acorns and limbs and leaves and takes a stick to an oak tree and say, oh, bad oak tree. Or anybody sane does not criticize the behavior of lions. of possums. It's just ridiculous. You've got to be a little on the edge of the mainstream of even of common mental existence. Well, you simply must see what I'm saying. There's nothing to criticize. A lion, lions. Dogs, dogs. Dog, trees, tree. Men, men. But having this, and see, when I say how men actually live, what you have also, a variation of that, is how you're living down here. It is the automatic instinctive life of man, and up here it's the life that man believes to be otherwise, which is a lot better compliance to federal regulations of truth in advertising than to say that from the level of consciousness down, man lives a life of total autonomy and instinctiveness, and then up here he doesn't. You can say that, but it's not true. This is a closer telling, is to say that from down here, and no one questions that. It's why you do not, that even man's mind will not criticize a wolf or a moose. I mean, even if a wolf comes in your backyard and scratches up your rose bushes looking for something. Now, you can certainly be angry. You know, your beautiful roses, but you do know that it takes someone outside the even common mainstream to then become a personal critic of wolves or foxes to get involved that we should do something. We should round up all the wolves or the foxes, and we should give them some kind of a training. We should make them more, teach them to be more HC, horticulturally correct. Only someone off the radar scope of mainstream common existence. Well, and it could even be, you know, a bear could come up and maul and kill one of your family members. But you still, after you got the initial shock, I just want you to understand, you've got to realize that this, forget what the mind says for a minute. Because your mind, you could holler, I mean, once you got over the shock and you saw somebody, a loved one killed in front of you, a bear came up and you just got in the way and he thought he had something to eat and he just killed you, and then what started walking off, your mind could be shouting for a ranger, a gun. You understand? But after the initial shock, no one that can think, even in the ordinary sense, then becomes a critic of bears. Now, it does not withstand they might very well start a new organization of MAB, Mothers Against Bears. MAUB, M-A-U-B, Mothers Against Unruly Bears. And you might start a whole organization trying to keep bears out of all public parks or trying to round them up. You could do all that, but you still understand you would not suddenly have become, unless you lost your mind, a critic of bears. The bear simply did what bears do. And it is surely a damn shame that it kills somebody you know, and you might take it becomes your cause, then to try and protect others, you'd say, and all this kind of stuff. But you still do not criticize a bear. A bear, all he can do is bear it. In that same sense, what I was getting at, men do not criticize that for the same reason that they would understand, to take my description for a second, that just what's known as man's instinctive side operates automatically. And there's nothing to criticize about it. You don't criticize the operations of your stomach. You don't criticize someone else's breathing. It's just ridiculous. But when you get to where man thinks, to the area that, although he will know if it's pointed out, he will agree, that from the level of consciousness down, he lives an automatic, instinctive life, and that's it. And everybody go, okay. Now say, all right, comma, or semicolon. And in the mind, though, is a place where he believes he lives otherwise. So, now notice, I'm giving it a little bit better. It's not saying that he does, but he believes he does. It is only in the area where he believes and it's not absolute, but it's in the area where he can believe at any given time that he lives otherwise. It is only there. It is only in the human mind that you can criticize. I can't resist throwing this in. It may be a little too sticky, but it's just off to the side. It's the same thing. If you ask ordinary men, if somebody had followed what I was just saying, and I said, which is it, if the mind is the only thing that criticizes, which is it you think that mostly criticizes? Itself, that same area, or the area below, his instinctive self? And I would suggest to you, it might take a while to get it out. Well, all right, look at history. Look at how people operate, rather than just my one example. Men end up apparently criticizing from the level down. Do they not? That's what morality is. Morality is not some prohibitions and some injunctions, some exhortations about how you should think better. It's how you should behave better. And it's from the level of consciousness down where men behave. Because a man's mind does not go out and hit somebody. It can insult somebody. But the whole sense of civilization and morality, you understand, that line separates also the difference, for all intents and purposes, between thought and behavior. And men apparently are most concerned and most critical of behavior. I told you it's going to be quick. I ain't going to stick. Think about it later and you'll see it's true. And yet I've just got through pointing out several minutes ago that no sane person would criticize a bear for engaging in strictly bear behavior when it is absolutely automatic. The bear has no choice. It is instinctive. That's it, period. A bear cannot stop and think, well, is this person too small? Does he actually have food in him? It's a female. She's a lot smaller than me. I shouldn't pick on someone smaller than me. The bear instinctively smelled food and swapped at it. And so you could say, an ordinary mind could say, wait a minute, that belies what you just said. But remember, I said apparently. That if you look over the wide range of history, if you just look at life in general, what people are criticizing now, it normally seems to be behavior, does it not? One nation, or the president of one nation, criticizing the troop buildup of this opposing nation at his border. Or the mayor of a city criticizing the unruly element in the city who engages in criminal behavior. That you're hard-pressed to find what seems to be, at least at immediate view, the mind of man criticizing the mind of man. Just a sidestep for anybody that didn't find it all sticky enough already. Yep. Just because that's the way it appears doesn't mean that that's the end of it. It is only the whole world of criticism. Skip ahead, we'll skip a chapter. The whole world of criticism is the world of man's mind. Bodies do not criticize one another, and when it gets down to any degree of significance in this area, man's mind does not criticize behavior. I know it does. I know it does, because I just pointed out from one view that's all it does. That all men do to one another is criticize behavior. But it's not criticism in any functional sense, because it doesn't change anything. At any rate. The whole world of criticism is in the world of the mind. The danger for a few people in criticizing anything. But of course, once you see there's nothing to criticize, it's not your problem anyway, but we're sneaking up through a side entrance, or for those of you that are porch climbers, we'll get into a 1.5 story window. Or at least hang on to an eave. The danger for a few people in engaging and trailing along with any of the criticism that goes through you, or as easily put, of ever engaging in criticism externally, is that you have set up, and it may only take a second, but you have set up the fact, the reality, that you will then criticize your thinking, not your behavior. Forget all that. And you may start off apparently criticizing someone else's behavior. It doesn't matter what. I'm giving you the easiest way to look at it. Whenever you criticize anything externally, it will turn on you. Now, I don't mean some sort of moral justice. And I don't mean that what you accuse other people of will come back to haunt you. It's not that. The specifics have nothing to do with it. As long as you find fault out there, you will find fault with your thinking. And as if you needed it, all it does is enhance, spur on, cheer on, extend, fill up, add to the inner dialogue, which is just what a would-be mystic needs. Something more to think about, and something annoying at that. I mean, it's bad enough that, for those of you that no one seemed to like it several nights ago, that pointed out that the thing about trying to suspend thinking is that it's a lot easier when things are going well.
Yeah.
Well, then and when things are going bad.
Yeah.
It was worth a shot.
Yeah.
With some hesitation, because it sounds like it's psychological dribble again, but to maybe flesh it out a little bit more. A large part of the normal flow of traffic that life runs through man, that we, from the outset, we call individually our own thinking, the operations of our own mind, our own ideas. All it takes is some sincere observation, and you realize how much of it is engaged in criticism. Were it not for criticism, the automatic flow of thinking through man would run the risk, the serious risk, of coming to a halt. Put it to you another way. The reason I'm doing all this hesitation, well, you should know it's not because I can't think of anything to say. It's just the more simplistic and brutal and blunt that or such methods as we try to approach this, it gets stickier to put into words, and I almost have to fall back in the opposite direction and pull out these simple descriptions, this kind of psychological, everyday babble, with the hope, of course, that you look further. The criticism that a man has of his thinking, now what I'm about to say is not true, but there's no way to put it. The criticism that a man has about his own thinking is part of what keeps his own thinking going. When I say it's not true, it is true, but it's not true on the basis that that's what caused it to start. You want to try it's not true in the opposite direction? This is a little less not true in the opposite direction, that if you could stop criticizing your own thinking, if you stopped having any fault with what went through your mind, you would have a much greater possibility. Well, hey, you gotta look for any opening you can get. It could be that much, it could be this much. You've got a greater possibility at any particular time of being able to suspend thought. People do, it is not the common way of man to look at it in this description, or by these words. Men do not normally think about them criticizing their own thought or finding fault with it. But all it takes on an individual's part, if they're so wired up for this, is to attempt to become a continuing observer of what's passing through that tunnel, through that freight yard. And once you do, it is almost, okay, strike almost. It's almost impossible not to find fault with it. I told you to strike almost. It's almost impossible To become aware of what's going through your mind and not find fault with it. Because anyone with even a modicum of awareness of what goes through their mind, and with any sense of decency, propriety, just ordinary people, are going to be ashamed of some of the things they think, which is the same thing as finding fault. Because your mind, the thoughts going through your mind, contain insults, slurs, epithets, all forms of verbal abuse to the external world. I keep saying external world. It's people, you understand, because you don't direct it at trees or animals. But I just want you to, I was trying to get the wider picture that if you direct it out there, all it's going to do is to continue to fuel it internally. One doesn't cause the other. But if any man could suddenly show, if we could take the thoughts going through his mind and flash them up on the wall, I could stick a thing in his ear, this magic thing I brought back from, well, anyway, if I had something like that and could stick it in there and then told you to open your mouth and it turned into a projector, yeah. I approached to open your eyes with these two little strange looking devices I brought and turned the lights down, head you toward the wall, and we could see your thoughts up there. Then you do know any decent, ordinary person would be greatly ashamed. Broaching on acute humiliation. It's only natural. Two things. It's only natural for those kind of things to go through your mind, and it's only natural to find fault with them. In fact, the first one without the second one is at least a wolf pass, a weekend ticket away from ordinary humanity. That if you do not feel ashamed of those kind of thoughts, it will eventually become apparent to people around you, some way will come out, and you will become shunned as being antisocial or worse. You're supposed to feel ashamed. But once you see that there's nothing to criticize, and you understand that criticism itself helps fuel, I got to say this again, as if you needed it, and the reason I keep saying that is this doesn't really cause it. It's going to go on anyway. We're talking to a few people wherein I'm having to take three-dimensional reality and bring in a fourth dimension, and there's no way to make it fit into the words. That's why I keep talking about it in so many directions. But the point is, every time you, if you're struggling to do this kind of thing, every time you criticize, you're also encouraging yourself to stay in this condition. Not because you're angering the gods, and not because criticizing others will keep you at a low level of consciousness. No, no, no. That means no, 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 no. That means severe no, 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 no. That means distractingly, no, 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 no. That is, if you don't see that, you're distracted severely. The criticism of the external, if anything, increases your appeal, the appeal of the internal tar baby. And the internal tar baby, you remember from the story, is this thing that one guy, this very aggressive, this annoying, this critical, this hot-tempered bunny rabbit, thought was making fun of him. And if you recall, it was the fox simply made out this doll out of tar and set up on a stump, and he got down behind it, and when the rabbit went by, the fox says, "You ugly-looking son of a bitch." And after a few little interplays between the rabbit and this tar baby, which was actually the voice of this fox hanging behind it, need I say anything about to carry the metaphor into another level of metaphors having to do with conspiracies, ideas of God, and etc.? Surely I don't. At any rate, the rabbit finally says, "You can't talk about me that way. You say one more thing and I'll bust you." And surprised, the fox says, "Well, up close you're even uglier than I thought." You know? And the rabbit stuck. Hit him with the other front paw, stuck, kicked him with the back one. Pretty soon he's tied up. That's the tar baby story for those of you who don't know it. When you criticize the thinking that runs through your mind, you have, as if you needed it, as if it was necessary, but you have increased the appeal, the attraction, the allure of the internal tar baby. Because that's what you're doing, is beating on something that only makes you stick to it. If any of you would care to consider it right quick, as always, somewhere spread amongst human activities in general, and oftentimes amongst religions and so-called would-be systems of mysticism or some extreme attempt at spiritual development, whatever it's been called throughout the ages. Somewhere behind it all, you can see the reality of what you can start seeing about life itself, or what I'm pointing out. Is the whole idea, several aspects of it, of trying to be charitable, of actually trying to, in extreme cases, of men and women undertaking to behave, to turn their life, the behavioral aspect of their life, into trying to help others. Then all of the injunctions against criticizing other people. Then the attempt to do such things as meditate and not latch on to any thought. And I could go on and on, but we've covered enough. If you look at that all together, it is also an indistinct message that's not normally recognized, that any thought you give to thinking that's normal will be critical. It may not be the first one or two words out of your mouth, or it may not be for 30 seconds or 5 seconds. All this is irrelevant. But it will eventually become critical. It's supposed to. And it is, I do not know of a better story as when I stole the Star Baby. I could make up one. You know I can always make up one, but it's just perfect. That you are fighting something that not only can you not beat it, but the more you fight it, the more you're stuck with it. Which you would think also, if you begin to see that humanity sooner or later would stumble across that about why criticize other people. If you took a quick survey of 8,000 years worth of history, or you took a quick 8-year survey of your marriage, or you took an 18-year-old survey of your child, and you think, well, we've got everything from 8 years to 18 to 8,000 that I'm aware of generally, of criticizing other people, attempting to help them. And thus far between myself personally and my family and humanity in general collectively over 8,000 years, I would say that the degree of success that all of humanity and myself have enjoyed could probably be measured inside the right heart chamber of an IRS agent. A thimble. Success is almost totally lacking, and yet does that stop anyone? No. If you recall, when I started some of this was a couple of nights ago with a news item about that criticism is never a nutrient. Criticism is never growth productive. It is not nourishment. And by any ordinary view, that's untrue. That men would say that it's only through criticism that humanity rectifies, corrects its mistakes. And you can't argue it. It's the same way of saying, well, if you're not going to criticize all the atrocities that men have inflicted upon one another, you can't do anything with that. You cannot talk to somebody, an ordinary person, about extraordinary things. You cannot talk to a mind being run by a fox, by an outside force. You cannot talk to it on a basis that would require that they have some individual thinking, and men do not. But what I was going to say was, if you could see it from a wide view, you can't tell an ordinary person, what I started to say, you can't tell them if they say, well, criticism does help, that we correct their mistakes, that you can correct other people's behavior. We correct people on a large, even scientific level. There'll be a theory that's held for a while, that's studied, and somebody come along and criticize it in a way that's positive and makes people go, oh, I see, it's a positive criticism. Wait, you made a mistake here in the equation. That's why it won't work. Ah. As always, you can't argue that because I just did it for them. And they go, criticism does help. Yeah. Criticism is not a growth factor. There is no such thing as positive criticism. And regardless, I just made up the examples. That a man could say, well, criticism does work because here was a man attempting to do something, come up with a new theory. He almost had one, he just sure it was correct. And one of his students criticized his equation. And by so doing, he found the mistake. That we criticized the opinion that the world was flat. We criticized it. And we straightened it out. Think about that. You straighten out the world? Well, that's off to another. You cannot argue with an ordinary person if you say that criticism is never growth productive. It's never a positive thing. From any ordinary view it is, but it is not. And what I was going to throw in finally about this 8,000 years worth of history, if a person could accidentally, if you could hit them in a surprising way, in a surprising place with a hammer somewhere about the head, so that just momentarily they could suspend thought and yet be conscious and see, and then you ask them during that brief little interlude, like, look right now, you're sophisticated, what has criticism ever done for humanity? How has it changed the way people live? And just before he came back to his ordinary state of consciousness, he would realize momentarily it's changed nothing. All right, how about this? Men are still criticizing one another for the same things they were criticizing them for 8,000 years ago. Does that help? The game has not changed. The things that men were criticizing one another for 8,000 years ago, they did not slowly correct some of those, so that we're on some new areas now. It's the same areas. You are supposed to find fault with thinking. You cannot be sane, you cannot be ordinary and not find fault with your thinking if you give it any notice. It is also on that basis, which three-dimensionally will not get you anywhere. It's simply a carousel. It's a continuing spiral. But that's, again, the same kind of things as making spiritual confessions. It's the same thing as the basis of this attempted treatment of so-called mental problems, mental disturbances, by talking analysis. That in some way we will bring it out. That people are finding fault with their thoughts, and so in some way we can analyze it, we can have some sort of a remedial effect on it. Which was one of the claims for psychiatry, because now we're getting somewhere. And psychiatry is nothing new. It's somebody talking about the problems they have with how they think. And psychiatry suddenly announced, well, here it is, finally, we're reaching close to the 20th century, a new age is born. No, it didn't. People have been doing that as far back as history goes. And simultaneously being unable, absolutely unable, to see that it changes nothing. Once you see what criticism is beyond the word, and once you see beyond the obvious, indisputable reality that criticism at the ordinary level does help, that humanity must have criticism, things would never improve. Even though that's true at that level. Once you see what criticism is, and once you see what life is, criticism simply is of no value whatsoever. That's the best news. That's the best ordinary view. The better view for the few is that it's a grave danger, because what it does is simply support, encourage, enhance you finding fault with the way you think anyway. And that's the last thing in the world you need. We could conclude by asking a question that if none of the thoughts that men normally have are worthy of any criticism or deserve it, then you could ask, well, do they deserve any credit? Do they deserve any attention? And based upon a few chuckles, I will give credit that some of you realize that the answer to the second question is the same sort of as the first one, that no, it doesn't. So then you'd be left with the third question. Well, what sort of thinking would be worthy of some attention, some credit? What kind of thinking would be worthy of man? And that's easy. It's the first two questions that are hard to ever see. The third one's easy. But even ordinary people think the third one's easy. But for the ordinary people, it's impossible. That's why they must come up with mortally conceived paradigms by which to measure anything, which I couldn't get around to that one tonight. But the only way that you can conceive of at the thinking level of getting somewhere in life, you know what that means? Actually getting somewhere, that you're making progress at the ordinary level. The only way that you can do that is, first off, you have got to have a mentally, that is a mortally, but a mentally conceived of model of what human existence is. Now, we're talking about a model. We're not talking about the way men live. The model is mental, but you've got to have some kind of model, and then within that model is the only way that you can even imagine men make progress. Christians have a Christian model of reality. You've got to have some model, and it's only within the Christian model. You understand? A whole complex model. It's only within that there is any conception, any illusion, any feel, any theorization that getting somewhere is possible. Because you try to convert somebody, say, to become a Christian or a Muslim or whatever, say a Christian, and they go, what's the purpose? And they go, are you satisfied with the way you live and what you are? And they go, well, no. You go, here it is. If you come in, you live by our principles and our teachings, then you can overcome some things. You work on them one at a time. We have steps here. We have the 10 Commandments, the 12, whatever. We got these steps you go through. It is only by having a model, and by model, and I'm running out of time. Do you understand? I'm saying something conjured up. It's real enough, but it's up above the level of consciousness. It is not down at the automatic, instinctive way in which men live. You've got to have this made-up model to have the conception that you're going somewhere. To believe that you're going, we won't change from my mythical Orient Express, how about Pilgrim's Progress? To believe that you're on a train going from the city of destruction, that's where you started, the pilgrim, to the celestial one, even though they're both imaginary, to even imagine you're getting there, first off, I mean, even though people who think they're getting there are on an imaginary journey, but to even start the imaginary journey, you first got to accept, you've got to adopt some imaginary map, some imaginary system, in this case, the Christian system. It doesn't have to be religious, it could be simply the decent Irish system. It could be the decent, or the Smith system. It could just be your clan somewhere. You were in a village somewhere, and it wasn't that big, and you were the Smith clan. The only way you can judge progress is in relationship to some perceived, some artificial is what it amounts to, in the same way as the mind, anything the mind conjures up. It has to be your adoption of some artificial paradigm, some model, some picture of what life is, so that you can then imagine there's some progress possible, that you can actually get somewhere. Back to the question, I said the third question is that if no thought, that none of the things going through man is worthy of criticism, deserves it, now I said that the second one, I hinted and you went ahead and figured it out, then what, is there any that's worth, is there any that are deserving, they're worthwhile? Then the third question should be, then is there any thinking that is worthwhile, if these are not? Is there any? I just answered it. Didn't I? Someone called John Bunyan's agent, and we'll find out.